How are you?
Very well, thank you, Nazir. Alhamdulillah.
Seeing your face, isn't it?
Yes.
Are you alright now,
Yes,
physically?
quite well, thank you.
And this new lady, is she new or I've seen her before?
Recently she came up with about 6 months ago. She was in Lexma Ijtima as well.
Did I meet you before? I have an impression that I've seen you before. What is during Lexma Ijtima?
Ijtima, yeah.
That's right, yes. That's right. And how's life, Rafa?
Very well, thank you.
Look very well, mashallah. Come on, let's begin with the questions.
Today we have got to these 4 brothers and 1 sister from Birmingham. And first
3 brothers and 1 sister.
6 brothers, yes. First is Muzaffar Clark, next is Asim Nelson, the third is brother Mikhail Chambers, and sister is Rebecca, yes.
Please, Muzaffar.
Well, the first question is, as always, sometimes on MTA, at the end of a meeting or a procedure, you ask people to join you in dua, and many people are asking if they're watching that program, either recorded or live, if they should join in.
They can join in dua universally, no problem. But not in salat, that is prayer.
Yes.
In prayer they cannot join, because you have to be arranged behind the imam in lines. If you begin to say regular prayer, which is said together with the imam, congregational prayer as we call it, in that prayer you have to be together in one place.
Yes.
So that all of you are facing Kaaba behind the imam, because that is not possible on television. So that is why I advise them not to even think of praying behind me during a televised prayer. But to raise your hands for prayer, that's no problem. Everywhere you can do it.
Thank you.
I'm a security officer and I work in superstores and shops, and during...
Employed by the stores?
Yes, that's right. During the times of, say, Maghrib and Isha, it's sort of awkward for me to say prayers because I don't really get a break until after midnight. So
until after midnight?
After midnight.
And you begin your duty when?
Around between Maghrib and Isha.
So that's the time for you to say your prayer?
But like, say, in the summer.
In the summer things will change. In summer you will have advantage in saying your prayers which come in the middle of the day. In winter you have the advantage of being able to say your prayers in time, on time, in the night duties, right? So you can shift your prayers accordingly. It's not at all impossible if you have a will to perform the prayers. Sometimes if a security officer like you are goes to his bosses and tells them his problem, I think they would not be stingy as to enough to not to permit you to say your prayer within 10 or 15 minutes.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum as well. My first question is, what is the Islamic teaching on male doctors treating women, such as for smear tests, because you find that a lot of women have been complaining about doctors, molesting them while under anesthetic. So
you see, it all depends on women as well. The attitudes, the way they dress, they show their body, etc. I think only one party cannot be blamed. Coquettishness unfortunately runs in women's blood, and they want to behave in a manner, although they are pious ladies sometimes, they do not want to go beyond certain limits, but they somehow crave to attract men's attention. to themselves and to their beauty. So in such cases, some stupid doctors think they're inviting. While they're not inviting, they're just behaving like women. But Muslim ladies are trained in a manner that discourage such moves, and the doctor understands it. Mostly they do. That's one thing. The other point is, as far as the lady's life is concerned, if she is a patient suffering from some disease, where immediately she should be attended and the body should be naked, in that case, to save the life of the lady, it is permissible for men to attend her. And the things you are telling me do not happen during such occasions. I have yet to come across a doctor, a surgeon, who would start misbehaving during a patient in surgery or while she is still recovering. These things happen only to such ladies who go casually to doctors and do not take proper care of their beauty and things, do not cover their heads properly, do not behave in a manner where the doctors think that they are not the ladies for me. Right?
Yes.
Please. Wa alaikum salam.
In many books that I've read about Nostradamus, he's often described as a prophet. Could he have really possessed...
I have read Nostradamus myself,
Yeah.
and I met many fans of Nostradamus, and once I discussed this book with someone who was not a Muslim, but who was a great believer in Nostradamus. And I told him to pinpoint the places where he thinks he predicted something which got realized much after his death. Now, if you read the book without consulting Nostradamus' book itself, then you're always misled. You think what you're reading is true. But when you do it as I did it, I told a believer in Nostradamus to pinpoint the places and the prophecies where they were made. Then I found him extremely embarrassed. He could not pinpoint a single place where the so-called prophecies of Nostradamus could be shown written there. So, in the afterlight of things, they look back. Like in the dusk, you look back at things and see what lies confused, not to be clearly read in things. Then I tried another angle. I told him to forget the past for a while, and from this moment in time to fix the prophecies for the future. Tell me what he reads there. He could not. But people want to believe in these things out of fun. They want to believe in pyramid, in Bermuda Triangle. They want to believe in ghosts and things because it satisfies their craving for the unnatural. But they do not want to believe in any supernatural which will have command over their lives, the habits which will try to discipline them. That they are not interested in. And that is religion. Regular divine religions do not just present such miracles and prophecies, it does it in a manner that one begins to believe in a transcendent power, and one begins to shape his own life according to his wishes. This is a difficult task. Supernatural or no supernatural, this is a task which they do not like. So practically such believers are atheists. these things as if, for the fun of them, and let not them interfere with their life habits, right?
So, are Ahmadi Muslims allowed to be conscientious objectors in times of war?
What?
Are Ahmadi Muslims allowed to be conscientious objectors in times of
It's
war?
not possible for any Muslim or any citizen during the time of war to become conscientious in the sense of the war being justified or unjustified. It is not for the common man to go into all the factors and sift them in a manner to draw a conclusion which is not drawn by the people in politics, the people who command the affairs of the country. And they may be right and they may be wrong. But in a society, discipline must be maintained at such hours. So if it is a wrong decision taken by the governments of such countries, and the war is not justified for the country, the soldier will not be held responsible by God for participating in that war. But if he refuses to participate, then he will be held responsible. Because it was not his job to do it. But at the same time, some occasions can arise during this war, or any other war, where a person knows a thing to be wrong because his religion has told him clearly that to take innocent blood of a child, of a woman, etc., during the conquest of cities, it is totally forbidden by all religions, in fact. So if his commanders tell him to do that and to save his life, he takes an innocent life, that's not proper. Where he can stand adamant, he said, no, neither my country allows you to do this to me. Because the laws of the country, if the whole case is taken to them, they will always will always favor the soldier who was given an unjustified task, rather than the officer who did it. That is why after the wars are over, war crimes are investigated. So in all areas of war crimes, a soldier, however lowly placed he may be, is justified to side with God's will, which is universal. Everybody knows what it is. And not with a distorted decision of a so-called officer, who may, out of the discipline of the army, impose his decision in such cases, but to those who follow them, they are still held criminals. Recently I saw a television program regarding such cases who were cruel to the Jews during Nazi days. The International Court of Justice differentiated between these two cases. And one criminal who had sought refuge in South America was condemned at last at the age of 80 or something, just for this reason. That although his superior had appointed him to do this, but he knew the things were wrong. You understand? Thank you. Next, what you want to ask?
Well, I was going to ask you if you already answered the question. The soldier, even if he goes ahead and commits those criminal acts under orders, is still responsible.
Yes.
Because he has to make the moral decision as to what he's doing is right or wrong.
But not in the overall decision of going to war. That's a different story.
Yes. Thank you.
Some non-Ahmadi Muslims claim that the Fazl Mosque was not the first mosque built, but the mosque in Woking Sorry?
Correct? That they are right. It was the first mosque built. The first mosque built in England was at Woking, but it was built as a monument, not as a mosque. And it was built by some non-Muslim British subjects. They convinced some governments to part with their money and to have this mosque built. It was a monumental piece to show the British people this is how the mosques work and this is how they are built and so on and so forth. So for some time it remained as a monument, but at the same time it was the Ahmadis first who got the possession of that mosque. And it was the Ahmadi Imam who started leading prayers in that mosque. So it so happened that either way the Ahmadis are the first. See?
So, according to Quranic and Islamic teachings, could you explain to us what happens to the soul after death, please?
The soul survives, the flesh does not. You know, like you must have heard in the Christian burial, what do you say, dust to dust or what?
Dust to dust, ashes to ashes.
Ashes to ashes, and one more thing.
Well, I thought it was ashes to ashes.
Dust to dust.
Yeah.
There are three things they say. Anyway.
I can't remember the third.
I know. Anyway, that is what happens to the body. Exactly. But the soul is that spirit in the body which cannot be located anywhere. And it cannot be mixed with the material body in a manner that you can call this is soul in this matter. It remains elusive. It works above mind and commands mind. And the brain is just a material computer in the hand of the mind or the soul. Controversy goes on as to whether the mind should be called the soul or it should be called a physical part of the brain. Many experts who have worked almost their lifetime in this subject, they are not Muslim, they do not work as Christians, as specialists on brain. They have written after their long experiences that the brain is not what commands the body. It is like a computer which is being operated by mind, and mind is all over the body. It has no place, that is soul. Right? Please.
Can telepathic communications and psychic connections between humans really exist? And if so, is it good for it to be developed further?
You mean parapsychic contact?
Yes, like you can sense what somebody's thinking, and you sort of know what's in
This is a normal daily observation among people, and I think to that extent every human is a paranormal, because when he sits close to someone, many times the thought of that person are transferred to him without taking any shape, like vibrations, etc. No vibrations can be intercepted between one mind and the other, yet the message is conveyed. And this is such a common experience that anybody who is aware and conscious of this, he will notice it. Sometimes his ideas are conveyed to the other person, and sometimes other person's ideas are conveyed to him. It is this phenomenon which is, I think, utilized by God in conveying His messages to humans. Because God speaks without a voice, without a vibration. His is not a language, but meanings. And the meanings have no language. This is a very important thing which people generally do not notice. A man who has never heard of any language, who does not speak either English or French or any other language for that matter, because he is deaf and dumb, of meanings he is not deprived. When he conceives a subject, it is never in words. Haven't you ever realized this? Therefore, a dumb and deaf person realizes meanings
Yes, without any
words appearing in his mind, because words are language.
Yeah.
And he does not learn language. So that shows that the brain is equipped by Allah to conceive meanings. And if that person who has some meaning in his mind, capable of converting that into words, that is language. That is the difference largely between animals and humans. Are also animals, sort of animals, but superior animals like humans. They also have meanings. The dogs have meanings. They like you, they dislike you, they are hungry, they are not hungry. But such meanings are never converted into words for them. But man has learned to transfer his meanings into words. See? So that is why it is possible, without the formation of words, for just meanings to travel from one person to the other. That is why it's also possible for an Englishman to convey his message to a Chinese who has no idea of what English is. But if he sits close enough to him, his thoughts, his views will be converted, will be transferred to him.
Yes.
Right? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Rebecca was going to ask, is it possible to develop those?
Of course it is possible.
attributes?
That is why the parapsychics develop this in super, it is not supernatural, but they call it paranatural. There is some sort of nature involved which we do not understand. But parapsychic or paranatural phenomena are based on this thing. And you can consciously develop it, with the result that you concentrate on some meaning, so much so that the people sitting around me all begin to think in the same terms, like a tuning fork, which conveys its tune to the other similar tuning fork. So from brain to brain, these things travel, but you have to possess a stronger brain to convey your message to comparatively less strong brains. Less strong not in every department, but less strong in this art of doing so. Some people have learned this art, some have not. So those who have learned this art, their brains become stronger with the practice. Right?
Thank you.
Are you entertaining this view of becoming a parapsychologist?
No, it's just that sometimes it seems like coincidence, but sometimes I feel like I know what somebody's thinking, or I know exactly what they're going to say next.
Yes, that's
and
right.
Sometimes it happens far too often to be coincidence.
Right. That could be divided into two things. One, the flow of conversation sometimes ends up in a certain, narrowly defined branch. It happens if you know the person and his natural attitude. So before he has said something, you can jump ahead and draw a conclusion that this is what that person is going to say. But it does not happen always like this. Sometimes the parapsychic phenomena works. And without knowing the person, as I've described, his thoughts can jump onto you. And they do not take any time in this. While the framing of sentence and filling your thoughts into that framework takes quite some time. And that is exactly why in dreams sometimes we see in a few seconds things of almost a lifetime, because the brain does not have to frame words and sentences and so on. The meaning just is grasped like the sunlight falls upon somebody, and there you are. So the dreams take much shorter time in seeing things which you remember later on, because you give them words. That is why the people, if you closely watch them when they are conveying a dream to you, they grope for words. It was like this and like this and like this, because the brain had seen it, what it had. To give it a language is the work of the person who has seen the dream. And he takes much longer. In our Jamia days when I was a student, there used to be a student who used to go into short naps during lectures, and repeatedly so. And the moment he would wake up, we knew him, so the next sitting next to him would ask him, "What did you see in a dream?" And he would start relating a dream which took sometimes half an hour, while he had gone to sleep only for a second or a few seconds. But the dream he saw during that period, it lasted till half an hour or more. So this was a joke at that time. But later on, when I read the subject, I knew poor man was honest in this. He did experience this, right?
Well, it said a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yes, exactly. That's right.
Well, my turn again. I was listening to the radio, to a religious program last Sunday, and they were talking about changes to the order of service, where the Church of England service book, which they run the services according to the service book, and for the new version they've decided that the 10 Commandments are a bit too sombre or dull to be read as part of the service, so they've just relegated them to an appendix at the back. So just wondering how you feel about the 10 Commandments being treated in such a manner.
It's not just what I feel about the 10 Commandments. The question should be what I feel about the shape of Christianity today, what's happening to it. There are two things possible. Either it is revealed from God, by God, or it is man-made. If Christianity is man-made, then you can do anything to it. A more modern man can suit himself and bring about the required changes to adjust in the modern society. But if it is from God, what right have you to change it? Either believe or do not believe. These are the two options. And when you do not believe, I do not care. When you believe, then you can't change. The Christianity must be a fixed Christianity. Right?
Thank you.
Please.
Absolutely. In the sects of Christianity, there's a sect called the Unitarians.
Yes, I know.
And I was trying to find out, being as they don't believe in the Trinity, are they nearer to Islam and would they be like sort of worthwhile for?
In the beginning, the Unitarians were larger in number, much larger in number than those who began to believe in Trinity. The large number of Unitarians got ultimately converted to Islam. A very large number from among them. And a very large number, unfortunately, dwindled out because on the side of those who believed in Trinity was a government, a big government like Roman Empire. When that happened, then there was very little chance left for the Unitarians to survive and flourish. Because most people at such stages of history have already become practically atheists, or at least they do not take serious interest in religion. Imagine what might have happened 300 years after Jesus Christ. Because we know within 100 years of Ahmadiyyat we have to make very strong efforts, huge universal efforts to keep Ahmadis on the right path and make them practicing Ahmadiyyat. If you withdraw this central role of Khilafat from Christianity over the first 300 years, imagine what might have happened. The only role of Khilafat you read in history was enacted by first Unitarians and then those who believed in Trinity. It's a very distorted history which you read about, because those Christian leaders who were close to Pope, the concept of popes, they were the ones who were the torchbearers of unity in Christianity, like Jacob, etc. All the disciples of Jesus Christ who were directly educated by him were Unitarians. In the beginning of the split, they all sided with the Unitarian group. They were given different names, but they were Unitarians. And they were the ones who also believed in the continuity of Judaism into Christianity, so that Christian faith was in practice Judaic faith. In doctrines it was different only in the sense that Jesus had come, Christ had appeared. As far as the rest goes, and he had become the spiritual leader from then on. What was rejected by Christ was not the law, but the tendency of the law makers to act upon it superficially. He spoke of spirit repeatedly, but what he meant was that it's useless to practice a law without caring for its spirit. It is this perhaps what was misunderstood by St. Paul and many others, or they wanted it to be misunderstood, and they chucked the form altogether away and adopted a new path. They said, we are the bearer of the soul, and without a utensil you cannot bear milk or whatever you want to preserve. It must have a form to take care of the spirit. This is how things go. That's why you find milk bottles and others containers. You can't chuck the bottle out and container away. We want the spirit, the thing which is in it. But unfortunately, sometimes the thing which is in it is useless. The importance is given to the container. This is the age of packaging, for instance. Sometimes the gifts are packed so beautifully, or the cameras are packed so beautifully, that for a while you linger on not to throw the packing away, but slowly and gradually you are weaned away from that. So sometimes packaging is given a more important role than it possesses or it should have acquired. At such time, many religions go astray. They pay attention to the form and forget about what the form contains. It was at such a time that Jesus came in Judaism, where just the practice of form had become the Judaic religion or religion of Torah. What the form should have contained, the love of God, the love of mankind, the attitudes of justice, etc., towards the humankind, etc., they've all been withdrawn from it. Cruelty, hard-heartedness replaced what should have been the soul and spirit of religion. It may have caused grave reactions among other people who joined Christianity. So maybe genuinely they were driven away from this sort of Judaic practice. But the whole question is very involved. I have read it with care and I have analyzed the whole situation. So it's not possible for me to develop all of it here now. But this much I can tell you, that some people were honestly misled, some were dishonestly misleading. And what happened to Christianity is what you see today. What happened to the religion of Christ is another very sad story. Many Christians do not realize that it were not the Christians as trained by Jesus Christ who walked away of Judaism. Not at all. It was the Judaic church which made it impossible for them to remain attached to the Judaic church. This part of Christian beginning is unknown to most Christians of the world today, because they read that history which suits the Catholics and Protestants, etc., and do not read that history which some scholars have written, of course. But it goes against the grain of the present-day Christianity. Now, when I investigated with a mind to find similarities between the development of early Christianity and the development of Ahmadiyyat and the situation in which they found themselves struggling for life. Now here an effort was made by the clergy of the Orthodox Muslims to dispel us from Islam, to chuck us out of the pale of Islam. I wondered if this Messiah is true, as I believed him to be true, if a similar effort was made during the early period or not, and what was the technique, and why was it ultimately allowed to be successful. In our case, we are fighting back, but in that case, unfortunately, the people who were confronted with this effort on the part of the Judaic leaders failed to fight it back till a victory. Now, I explain this to you how it happened. Those Christians who followed Jesus Christ, who believed in the unity of God, they also believed in the continuation of Torah and the book of Torah as such. And they were all those who agreed with the disciples of Jesus Christ. It continued for a while, but it began to hurt the old stamp of Judaic leaders, They said, look here, they are within us, they come to attend our churches, and they create the impression that it's the same thing. So many Jews would be attracted to them because they're better, cleaner people. They're holy in their attitude, they're honest, they're truthful. And there's no compartmentalization between Judaism and this Christianity. So they come to our temples and follow what we say. This was relentlessly, erected against. So first the Judaic leaders, the leaders of Judaism, tried to persuade them not to come to these churches. Build your own you like, but you're not a part and parcel of the book and the followers of the book. They said, no, these are the churches from which we have been drawn. There are churches, the church, I mean the temples of Jews, they're the same temples we have helped you build, the same temples in which we participated fully. Have we every right to come? Then they invented a heinous device which they knew would compel them to leave these churches. They were still in the majority, so the leadership was in their hands. And the temple leader used to add in the sermon that we believe in Moses and David and we do this and that, and we also denounce Jesus as an impostor and a filthy man, not even fit to be called a normal human. He was this and that. Now, if you do this, it's impossible for the true lovers of Jesus to remain attached to these people. You see? That was the main problem, how they gradually left the older temple and formed a new entity. While I believe if they were wise enough, they should have built their temples exactly like the temples of the Jews. They were free to do that. That is what we have done and they could not do. We build mosques exactly like the mosques of the mainstream Muslims are. And we practice our religion exactly as they practice their religion, at least in form. So that is why the struggle continues in our case. The mainstream clergy is devising new means, more and more aggressive means against Ahmadis. They have, promulgated laws which make it binding for an Ahmadi not to say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, not to say his prayer, etc. If he does so at his own risk and at the peril of his life. All this has gone into legislation. Yet they fight on. This was unfortunately not done by the true Christians, the true followers of Jesus Christ. If they had done so, they could have gained the sympathy of the people around far more than the Pagan Christians. They stood up loyal to the distorted concept of Christianity. And the Christians who had the right concept of Christianity could not stand up being loyal to that and started deviating from the mainstream, and again, instead of carving their own faith exactly in the same manner as Jesus practiced it, they started moving away from it. So even in unity, this happened, unfortunately. And that is which did the gravest damage to the early Unitarian Christians. Right?
We have Unitarian Church these days, which is several hundred years old, and some of those people were martyred because of their refusal to accept the Trinity. And these people were persecuted, and many of them were, like the Quakers, they're in the forefront of human, helping human beings. And we still have many of those churches around today. Most of the congregation members tend to be older, and the younger ones get attracted by other Christian groups, or they go away. But there is still a residue of Unitarian churches
Yes,
in the
I
UK.
have read about that, investigated in fact, not only here but also in America and other places. First of all, the number is very small,
Yes, it is.
very small number. Secondly, they also have some distorted attitudes which are not in line with Islamic concept of unity. This is the remnant of the days when these influences began to penetrate them from all sides of Christianity. So you cannot say that they are exactly as Unitarian as we are as Muslims. The practices and beliefs move away a little here and a little there. But still, they must be respected as Unitarians. There is no doubt about it. Yes.
Thank you.
So, my next question has two parts. In light of what's just happened in the Gulf with Saddam and the American government, was he right in expelling them from Iraq? And the second part is, should he have stayed steadfast to his right of...
Why are they treated so, I should say, cruelly and so stiffly? That is the question. In the Middle East, there is a country who is being clearly watched lest that country should make a single atomic bomb. To develop its religious system is a far cry. But the whole world behind America seems to be united. Because when you say United Nations decisions, that is American decision, but it appears that is the world decision. Against Iraq, making that one atomic bomb. While in the same Middle East, people to whom those areas did not belong originally, it's recent history, that they have been carved out a piece of the Arab country and offered to them as an independent state. They have been permitted to make so many bombs, despite the verbal claims that the big powers will not permit small nations to build their own bombs, lest they should be misutilized. Hundreds of them, with a full delivery system. They have been claiming even to be able to destroy Moscow and the Russian nuclear armament. They have become so arrogant and so powerful. And it was permitted them to have happened. Now the question to which I am drawing, I am moving now ultimately is that did not the United Nations make many decisions, and the Security Council also decided so many times against Israel, and they were required to follow the dictates of the United Nations or the dictates of the Security Council. Correct? Did it happen or did it not? 47 times Security Council made binding decisions on Israel to do this or to do that. And 47 times they refused with scant respect. Said no. What right the Security Council has to move against Iraq for defying their one decision, while they did not move against Israel for defying 47 decisions? they should begin with the beginning, in the right order. Then I will have no objection against United Nations enforcing its concept of world security and its consequences upon Iraq or Saddam Hussein's government. It's all fraud, sheer deceit. It's the hatred of a Muslim country against a Muslim country becoming even a semblance of a world power. World power it can never become. Even if it invented bombs, nuclear bombs, it would be impossible for Iraq to use nuclear bombs against Israel, because once the bombs are created and the means to deliver them are created, they will be destroyed immediately by Israel before they do any damage to the state of Israel. It's impossible. So it's not a real danger which they are confronting. They are using a danger which is hypothetical to destroy a Muslim country. And that is why Saddam Hussein is kept alive. See, he gives them excuses to destroy the Iraqi people repeatedly, and hundreds of thousands of children die for not getting the medicines, etc., etc. Hundreds of thousands of children have become abnormal for life because of the paucity of right food, milk, etc. And all this cruelty is done in the name of United Nations. While one British girl is threatened with legal condemnation of death. A babysitter in America faces that. Now that is brought to the notice of the whole world. What cruelty, what legal cruelty it could have been. And what happened to the millions of Iraqi children every day in their life is ignored as if it's nothing happening, as if they were vermins. This is not fair. This is not justice and honesty. It is the rule of the night. That's all what it is. Right or wrong?
Right. Should he have been steadfast and not let them back in? Should he have stood by his actions?
The point is that after a while, in the West, some governments are waking up to this reality. They realize that that is too far. They realize that America is using United Nations to impose her will, which in turn is commanded by Israel to move against Iraq repeatedly, and the world is sitting quietly. So France is one of those powers who stood up against it openly and no. And which other? Russia is a sort of power, but three powers, two of them are from the Western Europe. France and one other power, I don't remember, they have stood up against this. And the so-called unity is broken. The American cause was damaged because cracks began to appear in their own group. Right? Please.
And the next question I've got is about ancient ruins and artifacts and things like that. And the question I have is that a lot of ancient artifacts seem to represent technology which are known to us, but from people like thousands of years BC, they wouldn't have known these things, like pyramids and things. There seems to be a lot of technology behind that, and I'm wondering, how do they actually possess this?
They show that our pride is arrogance. our pride in our own knowledge is arrogance, because Allah permitted many ancient people to rise in certain small areas of science beyond the imagination of the modern man. So I have read very closely about pyramids, and I was amazed to discover that even with the help of the most modern electronic devices, they cannot build a building like that with each stone placed precisely where it should have been placed, and with not the slightest deviation in its angle. And the stones being so heavy, how they were aligned. Their angle, if they are directed, if it is directed towards north, is precisely the same in case of every stone, every heavy stone is put upon the another. And the other discoveries of the exactness of the implementation of an architectural design, which even the modern architects agree that it's not possible for them to have implemented their designs with such accuracy as were done during the times of the pyramids. It was not magic, it was science. And with that science they had also realized the positions of heavenly bodies and their movements, etc. And that art has disappeared, that science is no more found in papers or described in formulas, etc. So we don't have any trace of that science left. But what it produced is still before us. That is why the Holy Quran challenges the modern man. That do you think you are great in your buildings and things? There are people before you who excelled beyond your command of building things and your know-how of building things. As a child, when I used to read this challenge, I was always, a bit not doubtful, but left in two minds as to how it could have happened. To my knowledge, the modern Empire State Building, etc., are far greater in so many things than all the pyramids put together. Yet the Holy Quran says the old knowledge of how to build great buildings was even greater than you, O modern man, think that you have achieved. So I couldn't understand it. But later on, because of this, I started studying the art of old buildings. I knew the Quran was right. I knew I was wrong in hesitating to understand why. But when I studied the mysteries of pyramids and other buildings, some other buildings, which have been turned into ruins, but they are also very specially built. When I read that, then gradually this dawned upon me that the Quran is not comparing in totality. The Quran is only comparing modern knowledge with older knowledge in certain defined areas where they have shot up like meteors and left the modern man wondering as to how they could do it. See? So that is the plan of things which Allah has decreed. Yes, please.
In the Cairo Museum, there's the remains of it's a long jar. It looks a bit like a wine jar, but it's generally believed to have been a battery that the Egyptians used for electroplating gold or silver, and that's 3,000 years old. It has the electrodes on it and the construction of a battery made in the 1800s.
Thank you for this information, and thank you for not asking a question because the time is over. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.